So you heard a little bit about me already, that I first moved to Madison to get my MBA, and that's where I met my wife, and we lived in Chicago for a while, and then moved back here to start a family. Let me talk a little bit about Burkhalter, though. One second. Okay. We've been around since 1959. We do a full suite of travel services. And so we do vacations, leisure travel, we do business travel, and group and incentive travel. We're headquartered here in Madison. We have 9 locations, 8 of them in southern Wisconsin, 1 in Iowa. With the business travel program, I work with a lot of really wonderful companies here. Some of the bigger ones are Sub-Zero and Task, but I work with companies that have 1 traveler up to hundreds of travelers. So quite a range there. Oh, and I chose this photo here of myself. This was from a family trip last year to Alaska. And it was this awesome multi-generational trip with my kids and the grandparents and everything. But I went with my in-laws who travel all the time. And it was also a homecoming for me. My dad was in the Army, and my childhood was in Alaska. I was there for 6 years growing up, and then moved to other places. All right. Okay, so I had to do this. Joining a Rotary meeting, talking about travel. I took a look at your Facebook page and found this amazing photo. And with all the years that I was in nonprofit work, mission statements just mean so much to me. And I love yours. And I've always associated Rotary with a very deep commitment to global connections. And so it was just something that was on my mind as I was preparing for this presentation. Okay. Thank you to everyone who filled out the survey. And then I also, so this presentation is modeled after responses from you in that survey, of how you're thinking about travel, how you're questioning travel, as well as information that I collected for, I also did a presentation recently for Forward Fest. And that survey also included a lot of business travelers that I work with and other people participating in that presentation. So all of the charts in this presentation is your data. It's how you all responded to things. But some of the ideas and concepts are from both areas of feedback that I got. So you'll see that in this presentation, these are the 5 goals that I have. One is, how are people thinking about, how do I make my decision whether or not to travel? Who's traveling right now and what's their experience been? Is it safe to travel? What types of restrictions will I face if I travel, and how may travel fundamentally change? And so this how things will fundamentally change, it's something that I am reflecting on quite a bit. It's no surprise that travel is an industry that's been extremely affected by the current pandemic. And so just a little bit more about me. My dad is from a teeny town, Wahpeton, North Dakota, and he was stationed in South Korea when he met my mom. And when the pandemic started, my mom called me, and she didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't, say, I'm so sorry that you're in an industry that's just bottomed out. She said, this is a learning time, Joanne. This is a time to rebuild, and to think about that. And she's, I think she brought that perspective immediately, because her family lost everything in the Korean War. And so this process that we have to go through to rebuild and look towards the future, it's just innate in all of us. And that's what, as a mom, that's what she wanted to say to me. So something that's been on my mind. Okay. So, and my presentation is about 15 minutes long, and then I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking and discuss what's top of mind for you. So this first question about how to make my decision whether or not to go, from a business travel perspective, it's black and white and then very ambiguous. So some companies have a very clear travel policy of no travel allowed. And then other companies have some travel allowed. When there is, and we'll get into the some travel allowed in a minute, that's where it gets pretty ambiguous. And then when we ask who is traveling right now and what types of travel that you're doing, your respondents were all in the survey driving your own car. So really limiting your exposure to anybody else. When I did my survey in August for the Forward Fest presentation, I had a lot of people who were driving their own car, but I also had others who were, they were renting cars, they were flying, they were staying in hotels as well. And a lot of them have roles like they're in sales or they're in agriculture or healthcare. So those are the folks that we were seeing doing the whole range of travel. So in terms of what type of travel is permitted, there's some from businesses, there's some clear responses, such as, well, if there's a conference that is meeting in person, you're allowed to go to that. Or there's some clear policies about private vehicle, otherwise you have to quarantine when you come back. And then you've got these other areas like necessary for business. So that's pretty open-ended, and that's going to be, dependent on the company and your manager and the individual traveler. And then this last one, domestic. I mean, the world has seen international travel very, very, very much grind to a halt. There's still some of it happening, but a lot less than before. All right. When asking about the experience, it sounds like it went pretty well. It is very cautious travel that people are taking, so I would expect to see that people felt pretty okay with their experience. All right. Is it safe to travel? I am not a public health expert, and so I'm treading into this question very carefully. What we all are looking at in the industry is that masking is one of the most important and impactful things and proven things that can be done right now. And just even whether or not you're traveling, I'm sure you guys all have been reading about and thinking about masks as well. So I thought these studies were very interesting. In preparing for my presentation, the bottom one about a study from Chinese homes was not one that I'd seen before, and I thought it was really interesting. So these were households where people were wearing masks at home. They didn't know yet that one of their fellow family members would test positive for COVID and did. And the masks at home were 79% effective at not impacting anyone else. So they were protected to such a degree, even within that shared household. All right. For the business travelers who I've been talking to they're used to spending 9-10 months of the year traveling domestically, internationally, who are really having a hard time about doing their jobs right now. It's the quarantines that are the restriction that they're the most worried about. And so these numbers here, they're actually from a survey that was done by the International Air Transportation Authority. And it's the quarantines that people are most worried about. We spent a lot of time in March and April rescuing stranded travelers who, when they started their trip, there wasn't any quarantines or restrictions in place. And then mid-trip, they were given 24 hours notice that borders were closing. And so it was a pretty scary experience for many people, and they don't want to repeat that. A big question that I get a lot too is, when will Europe open to US residents? And so the answer is, well, there's actually information that you can see from the EU of what they've published about who's on the list that are allowed to travel and who is not. And it's what you would expect. It's based on it's mostly based on data and then also some judgment and evaluation. So those first 2 points are, is your number of new cases per capita similar to what Europe is experiencing? And is the trend at least stable, if not getting better? And then there's this third category of a judgment about the country's overall response. Does it seem like the situation is under control and is being well managed, or does it not? All right, so there are many people who are looking to, that really travel's not going to return until we very much have this pandemic under control with with a vaccine, with better therapeutics. Like, how do we make it less deathly as it is right now? And so I think it's very interesting about, even when there is a safe vaccine that's available, what is the use of it going to look like? And your responses were very similar to the other one that I saw. And so, not quite half being interested in getting it as soon as it's available to the general public. Another third who want to wait a little bit and wait about 6 months into its availability. And then about 1 in 5 who aren't interested in getting it that first year. 0 respondents who said, I'm just not going to get it. And I think this tracks pretty similarly to national studies that have been done about people's interest in the vaccine, with maybe like a little bit more interest in getting it than what I've seen in some other national studies. Okay. And so this final category about how may travel fundamentally change, and then kind of like looking more at the near term versus medium term, what's it looking like right now? So first, this question about, are there incredible deals to be had for travel? The answer is yes and no. Near term, there are great deals for travel within the next couple of months. Most people I talk to are much more interested in travel next year. And the pricing that we've seen is all over the place. There are some really good deals, and there's some pricing that looks pretty similar to what you've seen in the past. The other thing that's going to happen next year, people in the industry are predicting, is, so this question, this came from one of your survey respondents: will airlines survive? Some low-cost carriers in Europe have already gone bankrupt, but as an overall, the larger ones will weather through this. Some economists in the summer were comparing what they thought the economic impact on the airline industry, that it would be similar to the impact of the 2008 financial crisis. More time has passed, and we'll see what the economists are saying in a few months, and so that prediction might be more dire. But then in 2008, it was really bad for a couple of years, 2008, 2009, and then it bounced back much faster than anyone predicted. And so, we'll see how the return looks, but there will be the short time period in which capacity for those airlines have shrunk quite a bit. Tens of thousands of layoffs at those companies, many of them coming this week because of the government support that they got that required them to keep some of those people employed until October. So we'll see another round of those layoffs. And then when travel comes back, hopefully in 2021, there will be more demand than there will be flights. And so a lot of people are predicting that flights will be more expensive next year, actually. Because not only will you have pent-up demand for travel, people who have been grounded for a really long time who really want to get back out there, you'll also have all the rebooked travel from canceled plans from this year, where people were able to take their travel credits and move them up into the following year. And I guess, let's see. One more area about business travel fundamentally changing. It's not just what's going to be available to you as a consumer of travel, but also from a business perspective, how may you think differently about travel that you would have done in the past? And so there are a lot of people who are saying that for some of them, they're glad that things have gone virtual. There's some types of meetings and trainings that they feel it's more efficient and they're accomplishing just as much or more. It seems to be this area of developing new relationships that is the hardest. So people are saying that their staff meetings, that their trainings and workshops, even some current account relationship meetings are working okay virtually. But it's the folks whose jobs are primarily to develop new relationships who are having a really hard time. Some other feedback that we got was about if during a meeting you needed to physically demonstrate a product, that's pretty hard to do virtually. And then I really was interested in this one about collaboration. I mentioned that I most recently was at the Nature Conservancy, which has state chapters all over the place and works on really cool regional issues like Great Lakes water initiatives. And when a lot of collaboration is required and people have to work through roadblocks and make a commitment at the end of the meeting that they're going to shift a little and change and do something differently, that's been a lot harder to do virtually. I've heard that about some of the global climate meetings that have been happening virtually that would have brought people from hundreds of countries together, that it's hard to get past those roadblocks. All right. Yep, so I was mentioning this, that most people say that there are some things that they'll continue to keep virtually in the future. And one of your respondents said that one in particular commented that board meetings they liked were virtual. And I agree. I think that's so cool. There's some 8 a.m. meetings that with dropping the kids off at school and daycare that I wouldn't have been able to make, and now they're a lot more accessible. So I do think that there are things that will keep with us after the pandemic. I do hope so during this time of learning. All right. I jumped the gun and I already talked about these. So meetings that people would say can work very well virtually. Okay. And so actually that's my presentation. On this last slide here, I just want to leave you with this Brené Brown quote, because I think that there's so much that travel does for us. There's so much connection that travel provides for us. It's a connection to people, to new ideas, to self-discoveries that are very hard to do without travel. And so for me, it's something that, as people say, oh, what's going to stay the same? What's going to be different? I think that such a strong desire to have these types of connections aren't going to go away. And so travel will come back, even if some things change about it. And I'm just going to go ahead and read this quote out loud because I love Brené Brown and I love the way she puts this. I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. And so I think we're all missing a little bit of that in our lives right now. And we all have to do our best to do what we can virtually, and then, do more when we can. All right, I'm gonna open it up for questions. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask away, or if you'd rather put stuff into the chat box, that's fine too.